The icy wind cut through my coat as I rushed towards Joel's office party, an uneasy feeling gnawing at me. The snow crunched beneath my boots with each hurried step. I shouldn't have doubted my instincts about him working late again on our anniversary. Bursting through the doors, my heart pounded in my chest at the raucous laughter and clinking glasses filling the room. I scanned the crowd until a familiar embrace stopped me dead in my tracks. There he was, my husband embracing his coworker, Marie, in a way no married man should. His hands roamed places they didn't belong as she giggled against his neck. "Joel?" The name caught in my throat. He jerked back, eyes widening like a kid with his hand caught in the cookie jar. "Marla, what are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing." I gestured between him and the red-faced Marie. His face flushed. "Honey, it's not what it looks like. We were just—" "Save it!" I snapped, my voice drowned out by a sudden stabbing pain radiating through my abdomen. I grimaced, clutching my swollen belly as another contraction hit. "Oh no. Marla, are you okay?" Concern etched his features as he took a hesitant step forward. I swatted his hand away. "Don't touch me. My water just broke, thanks to you." A hush fell over the partygoers as they turned our way. Marie's hand flew to her lips, her eyes darting between us. Joel paled. "What? But you're not due for another 2 weeks." "Well, your son couldn't wait any longer to make his appearance." I doubled over, gritting my teeth. 2 paramedics I hadn't noticed rushed over with a stretcher. "Ma'am, we need to get you to the hospital right away." Through clenched teeth, I nodded towards the bewildered gaggle of onlookers. "He's the father. What are you all gawking at? Show's over, nothing to see here." As the EMTs wheeled me towards the ambulance, Joel lingered behind, eyes downcast. Marie had vanished, no doubt slinking away in embarrassment. I couldn't bring myself to care anymore as another fiery contraction seized me. One thought prevailed. My baby would know his father's infidelity from the moment he entered this world. But I refused to let Joel's mistake define my child's future. Whatever difficulties lay ahead, I would face them head-on, as I had countless times before. Because when it came to protecting my family, I didn't back down from any fight. The piercing cries of my newborn son Lucas filled the hospital room, drowning out my heated argument with Joel. I cradled the swaddled infant against my chest, his tiny fists flailing. "Keep your voice down," I hissed at my husband, whose face had turned a bright shade of crimson. "You'll upset the baby." Joel opened his mouth to retort, but the death glare from the nurse stationed in the corner gave him pause. He lowered his voice to an angry whisper. "This is ridiculous, Marla. It was one stupid mistake at the office party, that's all. You're blowing this way out of proportion." My grip tightened around Lucas as fury blazed in my chest. "One mistake? I caught you groping your little secretary like a grimy frat boy." Joel's eyes flicked towards the nurse before returning to me. "Will you keep it down? Marie is just a coworker, I swear. We were both drunk, and it didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" I scoffed, unable to control the volume of my voice now. "Our 8-year-old daughter could have walked in on that disgusting display. How could you be so selfish and irresponsible?" The nurse cleared her throat loudly, leveling a stern look at us both. "If you two can't keep things civil, I'll have to ask you to take this outside. The new mother and baby need their rest." I took a calming breath and looked down at Lucas, his cries finally subsiding. My heart melted at his tiny, scrunched-up features and bright blue eyes, eyes that reminded me so much of Elsie's. "For their sake, we at least need to try couples counseling," Joel pleaded in a hushed tone, placing his hand over mine. I recoiled from his touch, fighting the sting of tears. "So you can lie and manipulate some therapist into thinking this is all my fault? Fat chance." Brushing my fingers across Lucas's downy hair, I made a solemn vow to protect him and Elsie from any further damage. Talking had only revealed Joel's true selfish colors, ugly hues I'd been blind to for far too long. No, from now on my actions would need to speak louder than his empty words and broken promises. I was done being an obedient wife. It was time to rebuild something better from the ashes of our sham marriage. For the first time in years, I felt a perverse sense of clarity. No more playing the victim while he played the piped victim. His callous indiscretions had awoken a fierce protectress in me that wouldn't be easily tamed. When Joel placed his hand on my shoulder, no words of apology or pleading glances could dissuade the icy resolution setting in. He wanted to persuade me with a sob story about being stressed from work and drinking too much. Fool me once, shame on him, but he wouldn't fool me again. "Get your hands off me," I said in a low, controlled tone, "and get out before I call security to remove you myself." For once, Joel seemed to understand I wasn't making empty threats. With a fallen expression, he turned and trudged from the room, leaving me alone with my son, the first ray of light peeking through the dark clouds his father had cast over our family. 6 weeks after giving birth to Lucas, I stood in the kitchen attempting to warm up a bottle of formula as my newborn wailed in the other room. My maternity leave gave me plenty of time to observe Joel's suspicious behavior. There, Mommy's coming," I cooed, hurrying into the nursery and scooping up my son. As he greedily sucked down the formula, I gently rocked him in my arms and stole a glance out the window into the driveway. Sure enough, Joel's car sat empty in its usual spot. Another late night at the office, no doubt. My grip tightened ever so slightly around the bottle at the thought of him sneaking around again with that trampy coworker of his. If he honestly expected me to stay home and play the doting housewife after his betrayal, he had another thing coming. Lucas polished off the bottle with a contented sigh. As I gently burped him, I couldn't help picturing the life of privation and heartbreak that awaited him and Elsie if I didn't take action soon. Well, no son of mine would grow up with an absentee cheating father figure if I had any say in the matter. Over the past few weeks, I'd begun stashing away evidence of Joel's misdeeds, incriminating receipts from fancy hotels, recordings of nasty voicemails, you name it. I even broke into his computer and email, unearthing a cache of X-rated messages between him and Marie that made my stomach turn. But more disturbing than the graphic details of his affair was the shady paper trail hinting at something even more insidious. Embezzlement from his job at the bank to fund his indulgent lifestyle. The sound of tires crunching on gravel outside drew my attention. I narrowed my eyes as headlights flashed through the window, followed by the telltale clicking of Joel's dress shoes on the front porch. Elsie came scampering into the nursery in her pajamas, her eyes lighting up at the sight of her baby brother. "Is Lucas awake? Can I hold him?" "Of course, honey." I smiled, easing Lucas into her waiting arms. "Why don't you take him into the living room and put on a movie? Mommy has to talk to Daddy about something." As Elsie scampered off, oblivious, the front door creaked open to reveal Joel trudging inside with disheveled hair and an undone tie. A faint whiff of perfume, definitely not my floral scent, wafted from his rumpled suit. He froze in the entryway when he saw me standing there, arms crossed over my chest. "You're still up?" "Evenings are hard when my husband works such mysterious late hours," I said in a tone dripping with false sweetness. Joel's eyes narrowed as he shrugged off his coat. "Is this about the budget reports again? Because I can X." "Can it, Joel?" I snapped, taking half a step forward. "I'm not an idiot. I know you've been screwing around behind my back, both literally and financially." His face paled as he registered my words. For a moment he seemed to shrink several inches where he stood. Maybe the truth was finally sinking into that thick skull of his. "Marla, I can explain everything." "Save your lies," I cut him off, holding up one finger. "I've got the proof, you philandering snake, and I'm taking you for everything you're worth." The cold fire blazing in my eyes seemed to finally give Joel pause. As he opened his mouth to speak again, I turned on my heel and stormed off down the hallway. No more words needed to be spoken. My mind was made up, and God help him if he tried to stand in my way. What the hell is this? Joel's furious voice boomed from the living room, shattering the peaceful Saturday morning calm. I stiffened in the kitchen, my hands stilling over the stack of bills I'd been organizing, so he'd finally noticed my latest move. Heavy footsteps approached as Lucas began fussing in his swing beside me. I turned just as Joel stormed into the kitchen, his face beet red and contorted with rage. In his white-knuckled grip, he clutched a fistful of papers, the financial statements I'd printed out documenting his shady money transfers. "Well?" He shoved the crumpled papers into my hands. "Care to explain why all our savings and your paychecks have been rerouted into a new account? One I didn't authorize?" I met his glare with stony defiance, squaring my shoulders. "It's called separating our assets before the divorce proceedings, Joel. I won't have you squandering away my hard-earned money on your selfish vices anymore. Vices? He barked a harsh laugh. So that's what you're calling it now? For your information, those assets are half mine too, you conniving buy. Don't you dare finish that sentence. My voice was low, each syllable sharpened to a lethal point. Not in front of our children. Joel opened his mouth, but any retort caught in his throat at the sound of Elsie's small voice from the hallway. Mommy? Daddy? What's going on? Our 8-year-old daughter stood timidly in her pajamas, clutching her worn stuffed bunny to her chest. Fear and confusion shone in her eyes as she took in our heated confrontation. The bluster seemed to drain from Joel in an instant at the sight of her. He sealed his lips, perhaps realizing what a disaster it would be to expose her tender mind to the full depths of his depravity. Using the brief silence to my advantage, I stepped towards Elsie and placed my hands on her small shoulders, offering a reassuring smile. It's okay, sweetie. Mommy and Daddy are just having a grown-up discussion. Her brow crinkled, unconvinced. But I heard yelling. I know, and I'm sorry we disturbed you, honey. I shot Joel a pointed look over my shoulder before guiding Elsie out of the kitchen. Why don't you go play with Lucas in the den for a little bit? I'll make us all pancakes for breakfast when Mommy is done talking. I could practically feel Joel's incredulous stare burning into the back of my head, no doubt silently fuming at having the wind taken out of his self-righteous sails, but he said nothing as I led Elsie out of the room. Once she was out of earshot, I whirled on my heel to face him again. Listen to me very carefully, Joel. I don't care how angry or betrayed you feel right now. You are the one who destroyed this family, not me. I shoved an accusing finger into his chest, heedless of how his jaw clenched or eyes flashed. So either accept that I'm protecting what's left of my children's futures from your reckless gambling, drugs, and whoring around, or get the hell out and sign over your rights. He opened his mouth, but I didn't let him get a word in. Those are your only two options. End of discussion. With that, I brushed past him and stormed down the hall after Elsie, my heart thundering in my ears. I wouldn't allow Joel's toxic manipulation and willful delusions to sink their venomous fangs any deeper into my resolve. In that moment, I started leaving the broken woman he'd exploited behind and embraced the cold, hard bitch he'd inevitably created. More mashed potatoes, sweetie? I plastered on a serene smile as I passed the bowl of lumpy spuds to my wide-eyed daughter Elsie. Around the long dining room table, the atmosphere hung thick with tension, thick enough to slice with a knife. On one side sat my parents' and brother's family, their usual boisterous dinner chatter uncharacteristically muted. On the other side, Joel's parents and sisters tried their best to avoid eye contact as they picked listlessly at their plates. Everyone except my clueless in-laws could sense that this was no ordinary Sunday family dinner. They had no idea what firestorm was about to rain down upon their precious son's empty charade of a life. Everything's delicious as always, Marla. My mother finally broke the uneasy silence with a tight smile. Although I must say, this surprise family get-together seems unexpected. Her pointed look spoke volumes. She knew her daughter too well. I never did anything without good reason, especially with family involved. Time to lay all the cards on the table, then. I cleared my throat and stood from my seat at the head of the table, smoothing the front of my dress. My heart knocked insistently beneath my ribcage, but my voice remained steady and calm. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. I cut my gaze towards Joel, who froze with his fork halfway to his lips. I brought you all together because, well, there's no easy way to say this. Joel has been unfaithful. A stunned hush fell over the entire table. Even Elsie looked up from her plate with a small crease forming between her brows. One of Joel's sisters finally sputtered a shocked laugh. What? Joel, she can't be serious. Rather than responding, my husband slowly lowered his fork and raised his eyes to meet mine with a look of mingled fear and fury. That's right. I pressed on. He's been having an affair with a co-worker, Marie Jennings. Turning to the cabinet, I retrieved a glossy manila envelope and began distributing its contents around the table. Copies of emails, credit card bills for pricey hotels, even a few provocative selfies that had my mother gasping in scandalized horror. Oh my God, Joel! How could you? His mother croaked. His father's face had turned an alarming shade of purple, fists clenching against the tablecloth. Is this some kind of sick joke? After everything I've done for you, putting you through college and getting you that cushy job. So, what's it going to be, Joel? I interjected before he could respond, locking eyes with my soon-to-be ex-husband. Are you going to keep lying about your lurid affair? Or perhaps explain the shady money transfers and tax evasion you've been committing to pay for your expensive hobbies? At the mention of financial crimes, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Even Elsie froze with her fork halfway to her mouth, eyes flicking back and forth between her dad and me. As Joel's bravado finally cracked, his shoulders slumped in humiliated defeat. His gaze skittered away from his father's accusatory glare. Marla, please, I'll do anything. Just don't take my kids from me. I leveled an icy look at the pathetic, whimpering wretch before me, a shadow of the swaggering hotshot I'd naively married all those years ago. It's a little late for apologies and empty promises, don't you think? My voice remained terribly calm, achingly composed as I dug the dagger even deeper. I'm not taking the kids anywhere. You dug your own grave and forced my hand. With a slight pause, I allowed my next words to detonate like a nuclear bomb over the smoking remains of his disgraced life. I'm taking everything else. The gavel cracked down with a crisp, definitive thud. Court is adjourned. Mr. Tanner, you are hereby ordered to pay Mrs. Tanner the sum of $3 million in assets and alimony, in addition to covering her legal fees. The judge's stern voice reverberated through the courthouse chamber. I couldn't stop the small smile from tugging at my lips as I stole a glance across the aisle. Joel sat ramrod straight, his expression one of stunned disbelief. The golden collar had officially slipped from around his neck. His silk tie now hung askew, a pathetic reminder of the pedestal he'd been shoved off. After all his gaslighting and manipulative tactics throughout our marriage and divorce proceedings, the utter lack of control contorting his face was almost beautiful. Almost. That's highway robbery, Joel's attorney sputtered, shoulders heaving with outrage. The judge merely quirked an eyebrow. Mr. Finch, need I remind you that your client's egregious infidelity and tax fraud more than justify the punitive damages. With that, he stood and swept from the bench, his black robes billowing behind him like a breath of merciful finality after 12 long months of legal hell. As the murmurs and shuffling resumed around me, I felt a gentle hand on my arm. My own attorney, Vanessa. You did it, Marla. It's finally over. Exhaling a shaky breath, I nodded and turned to face the unexpected, letting the foreign concept of closure wash over me. My lengthy to-do list shrank in that very moment. No longer would I lie awake, racked with stress and recounting every tiny injustice Joel had perpetrated. I wouldn't spend another sleepless night plotting my next counterattack or flipping through incriminating evidence. Because as the dust settled around the carnage from our knockdown, drag-out custody battle, the war was finally won. With the court ruling, I now had the means to start over and rebuild a stable life for my children, a life free of deception, lies, and constant heartache. Mom, are you okay? I blinked, drawn back to the courtroom by Elsie's small but concerned voice. At 10 years old, she had aged years in the span of a few months. Long gone was the innocent little girl I'd tried so hard to shield from her father's misdeeds. Not anymore. I'm fine, sweetheart. I managed a reassuring smile, smoothing back her dark curls. Better than fine, actually. Thanks to your amazing big sister sticking by me, we made it to the other side. Elsie said nothing, but the proud swell of her chest and resolute set to her jaw told me all I needed to know. Despite her tender age, she'd been my unshakable rock and pillar of strength to lean on. Mrs. Tanner? I turned to see Joel hovering nearby, having dismissed his lawyer. Our eyes met, twin pools of unfathomable depths passing between us in that moment. What was left to say, after all, that hadn't already been screamed from the rooftops through the endless cycle of hearings? His features contorted, an unnameable emotion flickering in those chilly blue depths before he finally spoke in a papery rasp. Congratulations, Marla. You got what you wanted. I stiffened, jaw setting, ready to unleash 1,000 blistering retorts. How dare he accuse me of wanting this nightmare? How dare he make it sound like some twisted victory when all I'd done was fight to survive? But the blackened shadows rimming his eyes and deep grooves framing his mouth gave me pause. This This pathetic, broken-down shell of a man was all that remained of the lying, cheating scumbag I'd once adored. "No, Joel," I said at last, my voice heavy with finality. "You brought this hell upon yourself, upon all of us. Don't ever forget that." Josie tugged on my sleeve, her shining eyes pleading for escape. Slipping my hand into hers, I turned away from the husk of the man I'd married and strode towards the courtroom doors. Like a phoenix rising from the ashes of betrayal, I would emerge into the light reborn, a protective warrior mother, hell-bent on reforging a new life not for myself, but for my remarkable children. "Well, Mrs. Tanner, your new office awaits." Linda, the firm's senior partner, swept her hand towards the corner space with an expansive view of the city skyline. A wide grin creased her face as she took in my stunned expression. "You're giving me the executive suite?" I managed to find my voice. "Of course," she clapped me on the shoulder. "After the hell you went through with that snake of an ex-husband, you've more than earned a prime office, not to mention racking up the highest half-year billables in the firm's history." Linda winked conspiratorially. Who knew all that divorce litigation would be such a lucrative crash course in family law? I allowed myself a small chuckle, shaking my head in disbelief. If someone had told me a year ago that the harrowing breakdown of my marriage would catapult my career to meteoric new heights, well, I would have sworn they were delirious. But there I stood in my tailored skirt suit and heels, the pungent aroma of new carpet and furniture polish wafting through the air like a promise of fresh starts. It was almost enough to erase the memories of those endless courthouse scenes, the ones that endlessly replayed in my mind like sadistic mental torture. With an appreciative nod, I stepped across the threshold into the spacious office, running my fingers along the sleek marble desktop. Every deliciously empty surface, devoid of photos or mementos, waiting to be filled with the successes I had single-handedly paved for myself. "You've certainly earned it, kiddo," Linda said, her tone sobering slightly. "God knows if I'd gone through half the hell you did with that deadbeat sperm donor." She left the rest unsaid with a loaded shake of her head. We both knew the sort of poisonous bitterness that could consume a person in the wake of such profound betrayal. Some nights, I still awoke gasping from nightmares of rehashing that grisly courtroom circus where Joel's depraved affair and financial crimes were dragged into the searing hot light. Sometimes the sound of his lawyer's sneering rebuttals still echoed in my head on a loop. But just as quickly as those haunting memories threatened to resurface, they dissipated as my gaze fell upon the twin artfully framed photos stationed on my desk's corner. Smiling portraits of my brave, remarkable children. My Elsie, all grown up at 13 now with that same stubborn tilt to her chin I recognized so well from the mirror, and my baby Lucas, cherub face nearly split in two by the dimpled grin he'd inherited from his deadbeat dad. The one good thing that wretched poor excuse for a father had given me, by some cosmic prank. As Linda excused herself to let me get settled, I lowered myself into the plush leather chair and tenderly traced the curve of my children's captured smiles. Their unconditional love and unwavering faith in me through everything, it had been the unshakable bedrock holding me together when all else crumbled around my ears. In my darkest hours, any flicker of doubt or self-pity evaporated the moment I pictured their sweet, soulful faces. Their future happiness and emotional well-being had been my sole guiding force during those endless legal battles with Joel and his smirking legal team. Now, thanks to securing sole custody alongside the financial settlement, their lives could finally begin anew as well. I had emerged victorious against tremendous odds to give them the stable, peaceful home life they deserved. As the late afternoon sunlight filtered through the high-rise windows in molten shafts of gold, I inhaled a deep, cleansing breath. For the first time in over a year, the knot of frantic anxiety and dread loosened its constricting bands around my chest. A new chapter had officially begun, and it would be inscribed on a fresh, unmarred slate of my own decisive making. Joel Tanner's betrayal may have razed my life to the foundations. But from the wreckage I had arisen like a majestic phoenix, reborn with steely wings and an indomitable spirit, and not a single vindictive force on heaven or earth could ever shackle me again. "Mom, do we really have to go to Dad's place today?" Elsie's complaint drew my attention from the pot of simmering pasta on the stove. At 15, her disdain for all things related to her father had only amplified over the years. "Yeah, it's not like he ever shows up for our stuff anymore," Lucas piped up from the kitchen table where he worked on his math homework. My 12-year-old shot me a withering look over the rim of his glasses, so reminiscent of my own patented glare. "Face it, he's a lost cause," I sighed, keeping my tone measured. "Your father may have made inexcusable mistakes, but he's still part of your lives whether we like it or not. Today is his scheduled visitation, so we're going." As if reacting to the sheer mention of Joel's name, the views outside the window morphed from cloudless blue skies to that fateful winter twilight 4 years earlier. The air turned brittle, faint strains of tinkling music and drunken laughter echoing like ghosts. My hands clenched on the countertop as the haunting image of my husband groping his secretary at his office party flickered behind my eyes. But Mom... Whatever protest Lucas mustered died on his lips at the sound of a sharp rapping on the front door. My breath hitched in my chest. Speak of the devil. With a resigned sigh, I wiped my hands and strode into the living room, steeling myself for the inevitable as I pulled open the door. Any harsh words I'd prepared withered on my tongue when I caught sight of the stooped, hollow figure standing on my porch. Joel. His slack face and sunken cheeks were barely recognizable from the cocky, immaculately groomed banker I'd married decades ago. The smart suit was gone, along with any semblance of pride or self-respect that might have once flickered in those red-rimmed eyes. "Marla." His gravelly voice was little more than a whisper. "I know I'm early, but I had to see you. Us." He placed one shaky hand on the doorframe, either to brace himself or prevent me from slamming it in his face. Not that such rudeness would even cross my mind anymore, not with the pitiful shadow of a man wilted before me. Pity, not hatred, filled my chest as those bloodshot eyes searched mine pleadingly. "Please, just give me 5 minutes to say what I came to say. After that, if you want me gone for good, I'll leave and never look back." "Dad?" Lucas appeared behind me, brow furrowed. "What are you doing here?" "Your visit isn't until—" "It's okay, sweetheart." I held up a hand, silently steeling myself. If Joel thought he could pull on what little remained of my heartstrings, I was prepared to cut them once and for all. 5 minutes, I repeated in a cool tone, standing aside to allow him entry. With hunched shoulders, he shuffled across the threshold, wincing under the weight of my icy glare. I crossed my arms as he turned to fully face me. "I know you've built an incredible life for yourself and the kids," Joel began, mustering what little dignity he had left through his unkempt appearance. "You were right all along. Everything with Marie, the money schemes. It was all my fault. My sickness." His gaze dropped to the hardwood floor, chest hitching with a shuddering breath. "I didn't see until it was too late how much I'd sabotaged the most precious things in my life. My own stupidity cost me my family, my career, my soul." I opened my mouth, ready to unleash the torrent of scalding retorts simmering for years. But the utterly defeated look in his bloodshot eyes, empty except for raw shame, stole the venom from my tongue. Instead, I simply hardened my expression and replied, "Yes, it did." Those 2 words seemed to shatter whatever final reserves he'd been grasping. Joel's shoulders slumped even further as he nodded, almost to himself. "You were right to take the kids from me, to take everything," he rasped. "I can't run from what I destroyed anymore. I just—" His eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I hope someday you can find it in your heart to forgive me." With that, he turned and trudged back towards the door, leaving deep footprints in his wake. A sad, pitiful relic of karma's brutally wrought justice. Once the door clicked shut behind him, Elsie arched one eyebrow at me. "Do you?" My lips thinned into a grim line. What difference did forgiveness make now? The insurmountable damage had long since been inflicted. Joel's words and pleas could never undo my anguish or wasted years. But I still had my life, my career, my children's boundless love. Squaring my jaw, I steered my daughter back towards the kitchen with one hand on her shoulder. The past was past. I had already risen from the ashes of betrayal, and no ghost of mistakes prior would ever haunt me again.